In this hopefully short episode, I want to talk about reverse engineering code. And I want to do this for a couple of reasons because I'm working with a company today and their architects, and a lot of great questions were asked during our discussion. So I want to share that in this channel because many of you may have the same questions. So in the 90s, I was working with SourceForge. Got a lot of source code out of SourceForge, open source, and shared back different projects we were working on. Then around 2008, GitHub started, and we transitioned to GitHub. So GitHub is a great place to share your project code in the open source or closed source world. As far as open source goes and your learning of different technologies and languages, GitHub is a great place in the open source world to get such source code to use. So whether you're getting source code, connecting to source code in GitHub or any other place, in Sparks, you're able to bring that source code into your modeling environment in order to understand it, work with it, and work with your team in delivering that code. So there's a couple of things I want to warn you about or prepare you for, and that's when you bring source code into your environment, make sure that if you're playing with the code, you're writing back to the code, you're reverse engineering either direction, that you're not stepping on your team's code. All right, so create your own specific branch or your own local private environment, bring that code in there and play with it to your heart's content, right? You mess things up, you can always go back out to the repository and bring the code back in and start over. The second thing to warn or prepare you for is what that code is going to look like within your Sparks Enterprise Architect environment. I have the browser over on the right, and when we're bringing in source code, you're bringing it into a specific package or namespace. So when we create a package or namespace, we're going to right click on it. We're going to understand or maybe create a specific root node. So let's add a root node here, and we're going to call this root node. Let me move it up here. We're going to call this root node, right? Learning. And there we go. We've got a root node specifically to learning. This is going to be our sandbox. And we're going to bring in some source. Very simple, a couple of classes. I'm not going out to GitHub. So let's bring in some source code and see what that looks like. All right, so we're at our learning node right here, namespace, and we're going to go to the develop tab, source code group, and files, and we're going to import source directory. You'll notice with focus on that root node, learning, that import source directory is disabled. We can't do it. So what we're going to do at this node is we're going to create a sub package under this, and we're just going to call it, I'm just going to call it app. Just something really simple, node, no diagram, package only, and there we go. I'm just going to call it app. Now we're going to go to the develop tab. We're going to go to source code files, and now you see import source directory is enabled. Let's go ahead and select it. We get this dialog box, import source directory. We are connected to the repository on a drive where that source code has been downloaded to. We're looking for the source type to be C#. We could certainly choose any other language. We're looking for C#, and the file extension is CS. We're going to leave all the defaults set for options, package structure, etc. We're going to leave that set, and we're going to hit OK. And do you want to set the current package namespace root? You can go yes or no. We're going to go yes, and I'll explain that in just a moment. All right. So now we brought in, I'm going to go ahead and close this. It is complete. We have brought in 2 class elements for this particular package called car and car2. All right. And you'll notice that the package that we imported has this red triangle or red corner icon at the lower right side of the package. And what this means is that this package has been set as a namespace root. So in software development, a namespace root typically refers to the starting point or top level container within a namespace hierarchy. Namespaces are used in programming languages to organize code elements such as classes, functions, variables, and more into logical groupings to avoid naming conflicts and improve code organization. Thus, this has been marked as the namespace root, and any other code that we develop or that we reverse engineer, import into Sparks, for example, would not be the namespace root. Don't create a namespace root within a namespace root if you don't know what you're doing, because it could cause conflict when you're compiling, developing, and delivering code. So what happens if you accidentally created a namespace root within a namespace root and you wanted to change this or remove this red icon? Go to the Develop tab in Sparks, go over here to Options under Source Code, and you'll see Set Package as Namespace Root. It's checked, uncheck it, and it removes that and fixes the problem. But never put a namespace root within another namespace root. Otherwise, it could cause problems, again, in your code delivery. And while I say never, never is never, or never is not never. You can nest namespaces within namespaces, but I think the better code practices would be importing or using other namespaces outside like we see in coding today. So if we were to go and look at this one, you can see we're using the system namespace out of the code library, and other forms of bringing in namespaces would be, keywords would be import, and I could go on, but we're not teaching coding here. We're trying to share modeling approaches. So in this example, we have two class elements. One's called car, one's called car2. These do exactly the same thing. It's just two different approaches to modeling and software development. In this particular case, the code is very simple. We have some attributes. If we look over on features, you can see we have some attributes, make, model, and year. We've gone ahead and we've set these, the scope is private. There's two strings and an int that's here that you can see in the code, very easily reading it. Then we have a constructor here that is essentially implementing these attributes within its operation. And then we have two methods here to get the make and to set the make. And of course, you could do that with any of the other attributes. The second approach is using a different programming technique that is more commonly used, using getters and setters. And so this is a level of abstraction where you're defining the attributes publicly, and then the constructor is implementing these defined properties, using get. So when this is invoked, this constructor, it's basically setting the make to the object element within the session. And then you can see here we've got a get, which then returns the make. And then we have a set, which writes to or sets the make. So when you're looking at this class element, it looks differently. The attributes don't show in features, yet the operations do show the attributes that are defined and stereotyped as properties. All right. So in your source repository, you're able to actually make those changes. As I talked about in previous videos, maybe the stubbed out code or high-level design is saying, hey, this is how we want to bring in our nouns and our verbs. And the development team comes along and writes a different version of that class element to take advantage of a different approach to encapsulation and object-oriented development. So that's the reason for sharing this video. We're having a great conversation with others, and some good questions are coming up, especially around namespace root and organizing your source code within your design repository within Sparks Enterprise Architect. And this is certainly applicable to other tooling that's out there outside of Sparks. We'll cover that later in channels. All right, I hope this extra clip was helpful for you. I know it's helpful for a couple of modelers that are out there right now. And thanks very much for asking the questions. And until the next episode, happy modeling.